At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law left a card on the table. Family trip. Clean the house before we're back. Even the nanny went along. I simply smiled. When they returned and their keys didn't work in the door, my daughter-in-law fainted. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Scarlett requests Eleanor bring coffee to guests, who comment on having help. The harsh scent of industrial cleaner stung Eleanor's nostrils as she knelt, scrubbing the cold, hard tiles of Celeste and Reginald's kitchen floor. Her 6 four-year-old knees, worn thin by decades of life, protested with every agonizing movement. Each sweep of the brush felt like a betrayal, a stark reminder of how far she had fallen. This wasn't her home. This wasn't even her son's home. This was the house of her daughter-in-law, Scarlett's parents, a grand, imposing structure that somehow managed to feel colder than the January wind whistling outside. Are you sure you're getting into the grout there, Eleanor? Scarlett's voice, a saccharine melody that never quite reached her eyes, floated from directly above her. Eleanor paused, the brush still in her aching hand, and glanced up. Scarlett stood, impeccably dressed in a silk robe, a freshly brewed cup of herbal tea steaming delicately in her manicured hand. Her gaze, though framed by a sympathetic tilt of her head, held a sharp, critical edge that Eleanor had come to know all too well. We do like things thoroughly clean, you know, especially with the winter grime tracked in. Scarlett's tone was sweet, almost apologetic, but the words were a barbed wire fence around Eleanor's heart, designed to keep her firmly in her place, a place far beneath the family she had once hoped to be part of. Just 2 weeks ago, Eleanor had been a homeowner, a proud one, for 37 years, in the modest house where she'd raised her son, Michael, and shared a lifetime with her late husband, Thomas. But Thomas's battle with a relentless cancer had drained their savings dry, leaving her with insurmountable medical bills that forced her to make the agonizing choice to sell. The thought of losing her sanctuary had been a dull ache for months, but the reality had been a brutal amputation. She'd watched as strangers walked through her memories, dissecting her life, before finally signing away the keys to the only home she'd ever truly known as an adult. Michael, her only son, a kind and dedicated military man, had been deployed overseas during the final, tumultuous months of the house sale. He'd called, his voice tight with concern, promising to make things right. But by the time he returned, bewildered and distraught, Eleanor was already homeless. Scarlett, ever the picture of gracious concern, had stepped in, offering Eleanor a temporary refuge. "Of course, you'll stay with my parents," she'd announced with a flourish, as if bestowing a great honor. "Celeste and Reginald have plenty of space, and it's so much more comfortable than a hotel." Comfortable, Eleanor thought bitterly. As she resumed scrubbing, the guest room Scarlett had so generously designated was a cramped, dusty space at the far end of the hallway, smelling faintly of mothballs and forgotten aspirations. It was barely large enough for a single bed and a small dresser, making Eleanor feel less like a guest and more like an unwelcome piece of stored luggage. Every time she breathed in that musty air, a wave of profound loneliness washed over her, reinforcing the feeling that she was a burden, an imposition on a life that wasn't hers. "Eleanor, have you started on the upstairs bathroom yet? The toilet needs a good scrub." Celeste's voice boomed from the living room, a jarring interruption to the quiet hum of Eleanor's misery. There was no pretense of gentleness with Celeste. Her commands were delivered with the brisk efficiency of a drill sergeant. Eleanor sighed, pushing herself upright with a groan that escaped her lips. The kitchen floor was still half done, but she knew better than to argue. "Yes, Celeste," she murmured, even though Celeste was too far away to hear her. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest. But Eleanor forced herself to remember. Be grateful. You have a roof over your head. You have food. This mantra had become her shield, her only defense against the rising tide of resentment that threatened to engulf her. Yet, with each aching joint and every demeaning request, the shield felt thinner, more brittle. Later that morning, as Eleanor sat nursing a glass of water, trying to soothe her inflamed knees, Scarlett appeared with a neatly printed list in her hand. "Mother and I thought this would help organize things," she said, her smile stretched a little too wide. The list, titled Household Assistance Schedule, detailed everything from laundry and meal preparation to dusting the antique furniture and weeding the rose garden. There were even specific instructions for vacuuming the Persian rugs. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate. Eleanor wasn't family staying in their time of need. She was hired help, expected to earn her keep, and then some. The paper felt heavy in her hand, a tangible manifestation of her newfound servitude. Of course, this is just temporary, dear, Scarlett continued, patting Eleanor's shoulder with a gesture that felt more like a possessive claim than an embrace. But we do need to think about your long-term plans. Having you here, while we absolutely adore having you, of course, can be a little stressful. We're just not used to having so much assistance around the house. You know, the implication was clear. Eleanor was an inconvenience. A problem that needed to be managed and eventually removed. Eleanor stared at the list, her mind drifting back decades. She remembered raising Michael alone after his father had left. A ghost of a man who disappeared without a trace. She'd worked 3 jobs, a cashier in the morning, a cleaner in the afternoon, and a seamstress at night just to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. She hadn't needed assistance then. She had been the assistance, the sole provider, the unwavering rock. And she had done it with pride. Never once feeling like a burden to anyone. A sudden, sharp gasp from Scarlett yanked her back to the present. "Oh, Eleanor! Look what you've done." Scarlett pointed to a small, barely perceptible chip on the rim of a porcelain plate on the counter. "This is from the Limoges set. They're irreplaceable." Eleanor knew, with a chilling certainty, that she hadn't touched that plate. She'd been meticulously careful. Yet, Scarlett's eyes, wide with feigned distress, held an accusation that brooked no argument. "Please, Eleanor, you simply must be more careful. These are family heirlooms." The words were a fresh wound, a deliberate attempt to undermine her, to make her feel incompetent and destructive. The afternoon dragged on, an endless cycle of scrubbing, dusting, and polishing. Eleanor's body screamed in protest, every muscle aching, every bone weary. The physical pain was a dull roar, but it was the emotional exhaustion that truly hollowed her out. She felt invisible, yet constantly scrutinized, a ghost in a gilded cage. From the hallway, she overheard Celeste and Reginald's hushed voices. "Such a burden, darling," Celeste whispered, her tone laced with exasperation. "I don't know how much longer we can manage this." Reginald mumbled something in agreement, a low, guttural sound that solidified Eleanor's worst fears. Her chest tightened, a cold knot forming in her stomach. They weren't just tolerating her. They resented her. Just as the last vestiges of daylight began to fade, guests arrived. Laughter and polite chatter filled the grand living room. Scarlett, her face radiant with hospitality, beckoned Eleanor. "Eleanor, darling, would you be a dear and bring out the coffee tray? Make sure it's fresh." As Eleanor shuffled in, balancing the heavy silver tray, she caught snippets of conversation. "Oh, you have help," a woman exclaimed, her eyes widening slightly as she looked at Eleanor. "How convenient," another chimed in. "It must be wonderful to have an extra pair of hands around, especially this time of year." Eleanor forced a thin smile, her heart heavy, the warmth of the coffee tray, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled deep in her soul. Eleanor realizes she is not just unwelcome, but entertainment. As Scarlett shoves the mop back into her trembling hands, the delicate china teacups clattered faintly on the silver tray as Eleanor navigated the opulent living room, her hands trembling. Each step felt precarious, as if the floorboards themselves were scrutinizing her. The air was thick with the cloying scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of polite conversation. But to Eleanor, it felt like a cage. As she bent to place the tray on a low coffee table, she caught a snippet of Celeste's hushed conversation with a guest. "Poor Eleanor," Celeste purred, her voice dripping with a false sympathy that made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Such a shame about her house, isn't it? Michael's stepmother, bless her heart, has fallen on hard times. We're doing our best to help her get back on her feet, of course." The heat rushed to Eleanor's cheeks, a mortifying blush that spoke of humiliation. Charity case. That was the label Celeste had so carefully, so subtly, branded her with. Eleanor retreated to the periphery, hoping to blend into the shadows, but the voices followed her. One would think, after so many years maintaining a proper household, she'd have a bit more finesse. Celeste continued, her voice lower now, but still carrying to Eleanor's ears. A ripple of suppressed laughter followed. Then Scarlett chimed in, her tone a perfect blend of concern and condescension. "Oh, Mother, you mustn't be so harsh. Eleanor's always done her best. It's just, some people aren't naturally inclined to the finer points of domestic management, are they?" Her feigned defense was a cruel twist of the knife, designed not to protect Eleanor, but to further expose her perceived inadequacies to a room full of strangers. Eleanor's jaw tightened. She had kept a meticulous home for nearly 4 decades, often on a shoestring budget, a feat far more challenging than managing a household with an endless supply of assistants. Finally, the coffee service was complete. Eleanor yearned for the quiet solitude of the cramped guest room, a sanctuary from the prying eyes and cutting remarks. She headed for the grand staircase, her legs aching, her spirit deflated. But before she could ascend the first step, Scarlett's voice cut through the air, sharp and unyielding. "Eleanor, a moment please." Eleanor turned slowly, her heart sinking. Scarlett stood in the entryway, her gaze fixed on the gleaming marble floor, which Eleanor had just finished polishing for the second time that evening. "Are you quite finished with the entryway, dear?" she asked, her voice deceptively soft. "Yes, Scarlett. I believe it's spotless." Eleanor's voice was weary, devoid of any real conviction. She knew what was coming. Scarlett knelt, her long fingers tracing an invisible line on the immaculate surface. "Spotless?" she repeated, a delicate brow arched in mock surprise. My, it appears we have differing definitions of the word, Eleanor. I distinctly see a smudge here, and a faint streak there. Perhaps you missed them? There were no smudges, no streaks. The marble gleamed, reflecting the ornate chandelier above like a mirror. But as Scarlett rose, her eyes met Eleanor's, and a faint, satisfied smirk played on her lips. It was then that Eleanor realized, with a sickening certainty, that Scarlett wasn't just criticizing her work, she was enjoying her torment. She reveled in Eleanor's vulnerability, her dependence. Eleanor picked up the mop, the weight of it feeling heavier than before. She bent down, her knees protesting loudly, and prepared to clean the already pristine floor for the 3rd time. As she did, Scarlett began to lecture, her voice growing sharper with each word. "You know, Eleanor, the key to doing a job properly is effort. Real effort. Not just going through the motions. If you apply yourself, truly apply yourself, you can achieve anything." Then, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, though loud enough for the guests in the living room to hear. "It's a principle that applies to all aspects of life, wouldn't you agree? Personal finances, for instance. Sometimes, people find themselves in difficult situations, not because of bad luck, but because of poor choices they've made along the way." Eleanor straightened up, her breath catching in her throat. This was a direct, unprovoked attack. "I did my best, Scarlett," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but firm. "I worked hard my whole life. I put everything I had into that house, into raising Michael." Scarlett scoffed, a dismissive sound that cut through Eleanor's defense. "Hard work is one thing, Eleanor. Wise choices are another. One simply can't expect to live a life of, shall we say, less than optimal planning, and then expect everything to fall into place." The laughter from the living room, now louder, sharper, seemed to mock her. Eleanor, a woman who had toiled her entire life, a woman who had sacrificed everything for her son, was being lectured on poor choices by someone half her age who had never known a day of real hardship. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in her mouth. "And do try to speed things up, Eleanor," Scarlett added, her tone hardening further. "Our guests are still here, and it's quite off-putting to have the domestic help dawdling in the entryway." The words domestic help struck Eleanor like a physical blow, leaving her breathless, her heart aching with a profound, searing pain. Eleanor gripped the mop handle, her hands trembling so violently that the bucket of soapy water sloshed precariously. She pushed the mop across the marble, her vision blurring with unshed tears, the shame, the anger, the bone-deep weariness. It all culminated in a sudden, clumsy movement. The mop head caught on an imaginary snag, sending a spray of dirty water across Scarlett's pristine silk robe. Scarlett's eyes narrowed, a flash of pure venom replacing her carefully constructed veneer. Without a word, she raised her hand and slapped Eleanor across the face. The sound echoed through the grand hallway, sharp and distinct, a brutal punctuation mark to the evening's humiliations. Eleanor stumbled backward, clutching her stinging cheek. A gasp escaped her lips, quickly followed by the hot prickle of tears in her eyes. The force of the blow had been unexpected, stunning her into a disbelieving silence. Scarlett stood over her, her chest heaving slightly, her eyes glittering with cold fury. "Clean it right, Eleanor," she snarled, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "And don't you dare touch my clothes again." From the living room, the hushed murmurs had ceased. All eyes were on them. Eleanor saw Celeste, not with an expression of shock or concern, but a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. One of the guests, a woman with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob, even managed a small, almost delighted smile. "Oh, Scarlett, darling," Celeste called out, her voice light, dismissive. "You simply must learn to delegate. Some people just need a firm hand, don't they? You're so good at handling difficult situations." Another guest chuckled. "Yes. Boundaries are so important, aren't they?" Eleanor looked from Scarlett's venomous gaze to Celeste's amused detachment, then to the guests, who now openly watched the spectacle unfold. It hit her then, with a devastating clarity. She wasn't just unwelcome. She was entertainment, a live show, a tragic figure for their amusement. Scarlett, seeing Eleanor's frozen despair, snatched the mop from her trembling hands and shoved it back, harder this time. "Get to it," she commanded, her voice dangerously low. "And don't stop until this entire floor shines." Michael repeats standards, then coldly asks if her standards include hitting a 6'4" woman. The sting in Eleanor's cheek throbbed, a fiery brand of humiliation. Tears blurred her vision as she knelt once more on the cold marble, her trembling hands pushing the mop across the already glistening floor. Each motion was a testament to her broken spirit, a visual confirmation of her daughter-in-law's cruelty. The snickers from the living room guests echoed in the high-ceilinged hallway, a soundtrack to her degradation. She was a spectacle, an object of derision. Then, a sudden, sharp slam from outside pierced the suffocating silence. It was a sound that shook the very foundations of the opulent house, followed by the heavy, measured cadence of footsteps marching up the walkway. Eleanor's head snapped up, a flicker of something she dared not name hope, fear, igniting within her. The front door, still ajar from the departing guest's quick exit earlier, swung open wider, revealing a figure silhouetted against the fading twilight. Michael. He stood there, magnificent and formidable, clad in his military fatigues, his duffel bag slung over one broad shoulder. His face, usually warm and open, was now a mask of grim determination, his eyes scanning the scene before him. He had returned early from training, a surprise that now carried the weight of an unexpected judgment. His gaze fell upon Eleanor, hunched over the mop, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He saw the angry red handprint blooming on her pale cheek, a stark contrast to the immaculate floor. His eyes then darted to Scarlett, who stood with her arms defiantly crossed, a triumphant smirk still lingering on her lips, and finally, to the dwindling guests, their faces a mixture of amusement and awkward discomfort. A deadly quiet descended upon the hallway, broken only by the faint strains of classical music from the living room. Michael's voice, when it came, was a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through Eleanor's very bones. "What the hell is going on here?" It wasn't a question. It was a pronouncement, laced with a raw fury, that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. Scarlett, ever the actress, sprang into action. Her defiant posture melted away, replaced by a facade of distressed vulnerability. She rushed towards Michael, her hands reaching for him, tears instantly welling in her eyes. "Oh, Michael, thank God you're home," she cried, her voice quivering with feigned relief. Your mother has been so difficult. Truly, I don't know what to do with her. Difficult? Michael repeated, his voice dangerously soft. His eyes, fixed with an unwavering intensity on the crimson mark on Eleanor's cheek, narrowed, his jaw clenched, a muscle working furiously beneath his skin. Scarlett's performance continued, her voice rising in a theatrical whine. Yes, difficult. She just won't listen. Michael, she argues about everything. And she was so disrespectful. I tried to be patient, but she just pushed me too far, and I had to. You had to what? Michael's voice dropped even lower, becoming a lethal whisper that promised retribution. His gaze remained locked on the angry handprint. Did you hit my mother, Scarlett? A flicker of panic crossed Scarlett's face, quickly replaced by indignation. I barely touched her. Michael. She was being so clumsy, and she almost ruined my silk robe. It was an accident, a reflex, but Michael wasn't listening to her flimsy excuses. The word accident seemed to ignite the simmering rage within him, transforming it into an inferno. You hit my mother, he roared, his voice exploding through the opulent house, shaking the very crystal in the chandelier. The raw power of his fury was terrifying. A primal force unleashed, the remaining guests, their amusement instantly evaporated, scrambled for the nearest exit, their polite chatter replaced by hushed, panicked apologies to Celeste as they fled. The front door slammed shut behind them, leaving only the three of them, Michael, Scarlett, and Eleanor, in the suddenly cavernous hallway. But Michael wasn't done. Not by a long shot. He strode towards Eleanor, his movements precise and deliberate. He knelt beside her, his large hand gently, almost reverently, touching her arm. Mom, he said, his voice now a soothing balm after the storm. Stand up. With surprising strength and tenderness, he helped her to her feet, steadying her as her wobbly legs threatened to give way. His grip on her arm was firm, a silent promise of protection. Then, Michael turned, his face a thundercloud, his eyes blazing with an unwavering intensity that made Scarlett visibly flinch. Now, he said, his voice flat and cold. You are going to explain to me, Scarlett, why my 4-year-old mother was on her hands and knees scrubbing your floor like a servant. Celeste, who had been hovering nervously in the doorway of the living room, attempted to interject, her voice a reedy protest. Oh, Michael, darling, Eleanor was just helping out. You know how she loves to keep busy. Michael didn't even glance at her. His gaze remained locked on Scarlett, a silent challenge in his eyes. Helping out? He repeated, his voice laced with venom. He gestured to the gleaming marble. This floor is spotless, not a single speck of dust. So tell me, Scarlett, what exactly was she helping out with? Scarlett, regaining some of her defiance, tossed her head. She missed spots. Michael, it's about maintaining standards in this house. Mother and I have very high standards. And Eleanor just wasn't meeting them. We offered her a place to stay, and the least she can do is pull her weight. She was disrespectful and refused to listen. Standards, Michael repeated, the word dripping with sarcasm. He took a slow, deliberate step towards Scarlett, his presence radiating menace. Are your standards so high, Scarlett, that they include hitting a 4-year-old woman, my mother, who just lost her home and everything she owns? His voice was a whip, cracking through the tense silence, demanding an answer that Scarlett clearly didn't have. He demands to see the guest room, leading them to a cramped, windowless storage room in the basement. The silence in the grand hallway was deafening, hanging heavy with unspoken accusations and Michael's raw fury. Scarlett, however, seemed incapable of grasping the gravity of the situation. Instead of offering an apology, or even a semblance of remorse, she squared her shoulders, a defiant glint in her eyes. Well, she snapped, her voice a brittle defense. Maybe if she'd do things right the first time, I wouldn't have to correct her. The words hung in the air, audacious and insolent. Michael's eyes, which had been burning with rage, now became chillingly quiet, a stillness more terrifying than any outburst. His voice dropped, a dangerous whisper that compelled every nerve in Eleanor's body to tense. Did you just say? He articulated each word with precise, deadly clarity. That you needed to correct my mother? Scarlett, seemingly emboldened by her own perceived righteousness, tried to recover. Michael, you don't understand the challenge. It's not easy having someone like Eleanor here. There's a certain adjustment period, and frankly, she's been a bit resistant. Michael cut her off, his voice rising, but still controlled, his gaze unwavering. Resistant? You want to talk about challenges? Scarlett, let me tell you about challenges. Let me tell you about the woman you just corrected. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Eleanor's, a silent plea for understanding passing between them. Eleanor instinctively reached out, a soft Michael, no, escaping her lips. She had always been private about her struggles, believing they were her burden alone, but Michael gently, yet firmly, shook his head. No, Mom. Scarlett needs to hear this. All of you do. He then fixed his gaze back on Scarlett, his eyes burning with an intensity that brooked no argument. My father left us when I was 8 years old. Poof. Gone. Just like that. And my mother, your difficult mother, raised me alone. She didn't have a wealthy family to fall back on. She didn't have a trust fund. She had her 2 hands and an unbreakable will. He began to recount, his voice steady but laced with a deep, poignant reverence, the story Eleanor had kept hidden for so long. She worked 3 jobs, Scarlett. 3, not because she enjoyed it, but because she had to. She cleaned offices until midnight, came home, and then took in laundry for other families. During the day, she worked in a factory, standing on her feet for 10, 12 hours a day, just to make sure I had food on the table, clothes on my back, and a decent education. Eleanor felt a fresh wave of tears cascade down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of a profound, overwhelming pride in her son, who saw her, truly saw her, for the first time in what felt like forever. She tried again to stop him, a choked whisper. Michael, please. No, Mom, he reiterated, his voice unwavering. She needs to hear this, especially since she feels the need to correct you. He paused, taking a deep breath, and then delivered the most shocking revelation. A secret Eleanor had guarded fiercely for decades. When she was just 15 years old, working in that factory, the same factory she went back to after my father left, she lost 3 fingers. Not an accident with a kitchen knife, as she always told you, Scarlett, but in a faulty machine, due to negligence. But she was too young, too afraid of losing her job, too desperate to provide for her family to ever complain. She just bandaged it up and went back to work. Scarlett's eyes, which had been narrowed in indignation, now widened, a flicker of genuine shock crossing her features. Eleanor watched her, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. Scarlett had never known. She had never asked. No one had, Michael continued, his voice softening with the raw emotion of the memory. She never complained about it, Scarlett. Not once. She just made up a story about a cooking accident to save face, to avoid pity, and to make sure no one thought she was incapable of providing. She kept working. Scarlett, with 7 fingers, she worked harder than most people do with 10. She learned to adapt, to overcome, to survive. All for me. Tears streamed freely down Eleanor's face now, blurring the edges of the grand, opulent hallway. To hear Michael, her son, articulate her sacrifices with such clarity, such fierce love, was a balm to her battered soul. It was as if he was lifting the heavy burden she had carried alone for so long. Every penny she saved, every extra shift she took, Michael explained, his voice laced with the painful truth, was for my future, for my college education, for my military career. She gave up her own happiness, her own peace, her own life, so that I could have a chance at a better one. She didn't make poor choices, Scarlett. She made selfless ones. She sacrificed everything. Scarlett stammered, her composure finally beginning to crack. I didn't know. Nobody ever told me. Michael's response was sharp, unforgiving. No, you didn't know. Because you never bothered to ask. You never bothered to learn about the woman who made the man you married. You just saw a convenient charity case to exploit. Celeste, who had been listening with growing discomfort, finally found her voice. Michael, you're overreacting. This is hardly the time or place for such dramatics. You're being incredibly rude to your wife. And to us. In our own home. Michael's gaze swung to Celeste, cutting her off with a look that dared her to continue. Rude? Is that what you call it, Celeste? When you stand by and watch your daughter try to humiliate my mother? When you let her slap her across the face? Is that your idea of hospitality? Reginald, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, attempting to assert some semblance of patriarchal authority. Now, Michael, that's enough. This is our house, and you will not speak to my wife in that tone. Michael let out a harsh, incredulous laugh, a sound devoid of any humor. Your house? Your hospitality? Let's talk about that, shall we? He took a step back, his eyes sweeping over the lavish surroundings, the expensive artwork, the gleaming floors. If this is your hospitality, then I shudder to think what kind of treatment you'd reserve for an actual unwelcome stranger. Because this, he gestured to the hallway, and then to Eleanor. This is not hospitality. This is abuse. He turned back to Scarlett, his voice cold and resolute. You offered my mother a guest room. I want to see this guest room. Right now. He didn't wait for a response, simply started walking towards the back of the house, his powerful strides signaling that he expected them to follow. Reluctantly, Scarlett and Celeste exchanged a nervous glance, then trailed after him, their faces now etched with a dawning fear. Michael led them not to the quiet room at the end of the hall, but down a narrow, dimly lit staircase, past dusty boxes and forgotten furniture, to a cramped, windowless storage room in the basement. If you're finding Eleanor's story as gripping as I am, please do me a favor. Take a moment to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Your support helps bring these powerful stories to life. Scarlett protests, citing their marriage and working through problems, but Michael states, some things are unforgivable. The air in the basement storage room was heavy and stale, thick with the unmistakable odor of mildew and neglect. Dust motes danced in the single bare bulb, hanging precariously from the low ceiling. Michael, a tall man, had to duck his head to avoid scraping it on the exposed pipes running overhead. His eyes swept across the cramped space, taking in the stacked boxes, the old, unused exercise equipment, and then finally, the small, lumpy cot tucked into a corner, covered with a thin, faded blanket. There were no windows, no ventilation, just a cold, damp concrete floor. This was Eleanor's guest room. A primal growl rumbled deep in Michael's chest. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely controlled fury. A low, dangerous whisper that resonated in the claustrophobic space. You've been making my mother sleep down here. In a storage closet. In a basement. He didn't look at Scarlett or Celeste. His gaze was fixed on the cot, a testament to their cruelty. Celeste, ever the defensive one, quickly chimed in. Oh, Michael, don't be so dramatic. It's perfectly adequate for a temporary arrangement. And Eleanor was quite grateful. Actually, she said she was grateful for any space. Her words were a flimsy shield against Michael's palpable rage, doing little to deflect the heat of his anger. Michael slowly turned, his eyes moving from the pathetic cot to Eleanor's tear-streaked face. The fury in his expression broke, giving way to a profound sorrow, a gut-wrenching pain. Mom, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you say anything? The question was a raw plea, a testament to his guilt and heartbreak. Eleanor, her voice small and fragile, looked down at her hands. I didn't want to bother you, Michael. You were in the middle of your training, and I knew how important it was. I didn't want to be a distraction. She didn't want to be a burden. That unspoken sentiment hung in the air, a testament to her lifelong self-sacrifice. Michael ran his hands through his short, military-cut hair, a gesture of profound distress. He stepped towards Eleanor, his powerful frame radiating protective energy. Mom, you are never a bother. Do you hear me? Never. You're my mother. You're the most important person in my life. More important than my career. More important than anyone. He glanced at Scarlett, his eyes blazing, making it clear exactly who that anyone referred to. Scarlett, who had been shrinking back against the wall, made a small, pathetic sound of protest. Michael rounded on her, his voice devoid of any warmth. More important than anyone. Scarlett, you treated her like garbage, like she was less than human. After everything she's done for me. For us. After all her sacrifices, Scarlett's voice was barely a whisper, a weak attempt at justification. I was just trying to help her feel useful, Michael. She said she liked to keep busy. Useful? Michael exploded, the words spitting from his lips like venom. Useful? By making her scrub your spotless floors on her hands and knees? By humiliating her in front of your smug guests? By slapping her across the face when she made an honest mistake? His voice rose with each accusation, filling the dank basement with his righteous indignation. You didn't want her to feel useful, Scarlett. You wanted to make her feel worthless. You wanted to punish her for needing help, for being vulnerable. He took another step, closing the distance between them. His towering presence making Scarlett visibly tremble. And the worst part of all of it. Scarlett. Michael continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. The absolute worst part is that my mother, despite everything you put her through, was grateful. Grateful for this moldy, windowless closet. Grateful for the chance to clean your floors, because that's the kind of woman she is. Good, kind, selfless, and you married into that goodness, and you used it to your advantage. You exploited her inherent decency. You failed to understand the incredible woman you had in front of you. Scarlett's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Real tears this time, born of fear rather than genuine remorse. Michael, please, she sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand. I love you. You know I love you. It's been so stressful. Having an extra person in the house, it put a strain on everything. Michael stared at her, his expression one of utter disbelief. An extra person? He repeated, his voice incredulous. That extra person is my mother, the woman who gave me life, who sacrificed her own well-being to raise me, who lost her home after paying for her husband's medical bills. That's not an extra person, Scarlett, that's family, and you treated her worse than a stranger. He turned away from Scarlett, his decision made, his resolve ironclad. He walked towards Eleanor, his hand reaching for hers, his grip firm and reassuring. Mom, he stated, his voice calm and authoritative. Get your things. We're leaving. Now. Eleanor's eyes widened. Leaving? Michael, where will we go? You just got back. You don't have anywhere to stay either. Don't worry about it, Mom. Michael interrupted gently, but with an underlying steel. We'll figure it out, but you're not spending another minute in this house. Not another second under their roof. Scarlett, her eyes wide with panic, rushed forward, trying to interpose herself between Michael and Eleanor. Michael, no. You can't just leave. We're married. We can work through this, please. This is our life. Our home. Michael looked at her, his expression cold and distant, a stranger's gaze. Some things, Scarlett, he said, his voice quiet but final, are unforgivable. He discovers Scarlett intercepted Eleanor's desperate calls for help, telling her he was busy. The stale, mildew-laden air in the cramped basement storage room seemed to thicken, pressing down on them all. Scarlett, her face streaked with tears, reached out to Michael again, a desperate plea in her eyes, but Michael recoiled as if burned, pulling away sharply from her touch. His expression was a stone mask, hard and unforgiving. Unforgivable, he repeated, the word hanging heavy between them. He gestured around the pathetic space, then at Eleanor's still reddened cheek. You want to talk about working through problems, Scarlett? You think this is a problem we can just work through? His voice was dangerously low, barely controlled, a tremor of rage beneath the surface. Let's define abuse, shall we? Sticking my mother in a windowless, mildew-smelling storage room in a basement, forcing her to scrub floors like a slave, slapping her in front of guests, humiliating her to break her spirit. Is that not abuse in your book, Scarlett? Or is your definition of abuse as warped as your definition of hospitality? Scarlett, instead of answering, deflected, her voice a reedy whine. She wasn't doing things properly, Michael. Someone had to teach her. Mother and I, we just have certain standards, and your mother, bless her heart, simply doesn't understand them. You always taught me about setting expectations, Michael. Just then, Celeste, stepping further into the dank space, made another catastrophic mistake. That's right, Michael. It's a matter of different backgrounds, you see. Eleanor comes from a different background, so her standards of caliber are, naturally, quite different from ours. Celeste offered a self-satisfied nod, as if this explanation perfectly justified their actions. Michael's head snapped towards Celeste, his eyes blazing with a volcanic fury. Different backgrounds, he roared, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. Standards of caliber. What exactly do you mean by different background, Celeste? Are you implying my mother is somehow beneath you? That her worth is less than yours because she worked her entire life to provide for her child instead of inheriting everything? He then swept his arm around the basement, a sardonic, bitter laugh escaping his lips. And let's talk about caliber, shall we? Is this your caliber, Celeste? A mildew-smelling basement that you consider adequate living quarters for a human being, forced labor and public humiliation, your idea of teaching someone standards? My mother's humble home, the one she lost, was filled with more love, more dignity, and more genuine warmth than this entire mausoleum of a house could ever hope to contain. 2. Scarlett, her face twisted with a mixture of fear and indignation, interjected. That's unfair, Michael. My parents opened their home to your mother after she lied to us. She wasn't truthful about her situation. The accusation hung in the air, a jarring note in the symphony of anger and pain. Eleanor, who had been standing silently, her shoulders shaking, looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. Lied? What are you talking about, Scarlett? I never lied. Michael's furious gaze softened as he turned to his mother. Mom, what is she talking about? When exactly did you lose the house? Eleanor's eyes darted away, a flicker of shame crossing her face. Her voice was barely audible. About 3 months ago, Michael. She looked up, her eyes pleading. But I told you not to worry. I told you I was staying with Mrs. Davies, that everything was fine. I didn't want to upset you during training. A cold dread began to creep through Michael, 3 months ago. But he'd only returned 2 weeks ago to find her already homeless. There was a gap, a terrible, gaping hole in the timeline that made his blood run cold. 3 months ago, he repeated, his voice strained. But you just said you've only been here for 2 weeks. Where were you, Mom? Where did you stay before Celeste and Reginald opened their home? Eleanor swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the concrete floor, a whisper of a confession. In my car, Michael, just for a few days. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. His face drained of color, his jaw going slack. The anger, the fury, the protective rage that had fueled him moments ago, suddenly evaporated, replaced by a profound, agonizing shock. His voice was a bare rasp, barely able to form the question. You were sleeping in your car? My mother. You were sleeping in your car? Eleanor, seeing his devastation, tried to downplay it. Just for a few days. Michael. Truly. Before Scarlett found out and offered this arrangement. She gestured vaguely around the grim basement, but Michael wasn't listening. His head snapped back to Scarlett, his eyes now cold, dead, devoid of all emotion. You knew, he stated. Not a question, but an accusation. You knew my mother was sleeping in her car. How long, Scarlett? How long did you know before you offered her this wonderful sanctuary? Scarlett, now genuinely terrified, her face pale and drawn, stammered, I found out about 2 months ago, Michael. Her confession hung in the air, damning and irrefutable. 2 months. 2 months Eleanor had been homeless, desperately trying to survive, and Scarlett had known. Michael staggered backward, his hand flying to his head, clutching his hair. The betrayal was staggering, a punch to the gut that left him breathless. 2 months. He had been deployed, serving his country, believing his mother was safe, staying with a friend, and his wife, the woman he had sworn to love and protect, had known his mother was living out of her car, and had done nothing. Worse, she hadn't even told him, preventing him from intervening, from being there for his mother when she needed him most. He could have come home. He would have dropped everything. Then, a sudden, horrifying realization struck him, connecting the dots of his mother's evasive answers to his calls. "My calls," he whispered, a new layer of horror dawning on him. "Mom, you called me, didn't you? You tried to tell me, or at least let me know you needed help." Eleanor nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Michael. A few times, but Scarlett always told me you were busy, in a meeting, training, that I shouldn't bother you unless it was an emergency. She said you would call back when you had a moment. But you never did." Michael's eyes, now pools of icy fury, fixed on Scarlett. The complete, utter picture of her betrayal was clear. She hadn't just known. She had actively conspired to keep him in the dark, intercepting his mother's desperate cries for help, controlling the narrative, ensuring he remained oblivious, while his own mother endured unimaginable hardship. Michael expresses guilt for not seeing Scarlett's true character sooner, admitting little signs. The stale air of the basement was thick with the weight of Michael's accusation. His voice, now chillingly quiet, cut through Scarlett's feigned distress. 2 months, he repeated, his eyes fixed on her. "You actively concealed my mother's homelessness from me for 2 months. You intercepted her calls, knowing she was desperate, and you told her I was busy." He paused, letting the full horror of her actions sink in. "What else, Scarlett? What other lies have you told? What else did she ask you for that you denied?" Scarlett flinched, her pale face growing even whiter. She wrung her hands, avoiding his gaze. She asked for money. For a deposit on an apartment. "A small one," she said. "And what did you tell her?" Michael's voice was a low growl, pushing her, knowing there was more. "I told her we couldn't afford it," Scarlett whispered, her eyes finally flicking up to his, pleading for understanding. "We have our future to think about, Michael. Our investments, a new house. It wasn't in the budget right then." Michael let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "Not in the budget? Not in the budget, Scarlett? I have $30,000 sitting in our joint savings account, money I sent home from my deployments specifically for our future, money that could have easily secured my mother a safe, decent place to live. And you told her we couldn't afford it?" His voice was thick with disgust. "You chose a hypothetical future over the very real, immediate suffering of my mother. My mother is my family, Scarlett. My blood. My family." The last word hung in the air, echoing with a finality that struck Scarlett to her core. In that moment, she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had lost everything. Michael's gaze swept over her, a summary of her betrayals etched in his eyes. "You let her sleep in her car. You ignored her pleas for help. You intercepted her calls to me. You lied to her, telling her I was too busy, and when she finally, humiliatingly, accepted your offer of a temporary place, you stuck her in a basement closet and treated her like a servant, demanding she scrub floors, and then you slapped her." His voice broke, thick with the raw pain of guilt and betrayal. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes, usually so strong, now brimming with tears. "Mom," he choked out, "I am so sorry. I failed you. I trusted her, and I failed to see what she truly was. I should have been here. I should have known." Eleanor, despite her own pain, reached out to him, her touch a comforting balm. "No, Michael, my love. You didn't fail me. You were serving your country. You always do your best. But Michael shook his head, refusing to be absolved. I failed, Mom. I was blind. Blind to the woman I married. Blind to what she was doing to you. And that is unforgivable. He took a deep, shuddering breath, then turned back to Scarlett, his eyes colder than ever. All emotion had drained from them, leaving behind a hard, resolute emptiness. Pack your things, Scarlett. We're done. Scarlett gasped, a strangled sob escaping her lips. Michael, please. You can't mean that. This is just a misunderstanding. A fight. We can talk through this. We always do. She made a desperate lunge for him, trying to hold onto his arm, to cling to the remnants of their life together. But Michael gently, yet firmly, detached her hand. This isn't a fight, Scarlett, he stated, his voice flat, devoid of any anger, which somehow made it even more devastating. This is a revelation. A revelation of who you truly are. For 2 months, my mother was homeless. For 2 months, you knew. And for 2 months, instead of offering kindness, instead of telling me, instead of helping her, you let her suffer. You let her call for help, and you actively silenced her. And then you brought her here, not out of charity, but to humiliate her. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. There's no going back from that, Scarlett. There's nothing to talk through. The person I thought I married doesn't exist, and the person you are, I don't know her, and I certainly don't want to. As they began to ascend the steep basement stairs, Eleanor leaning heavily on Michael's arm, Scarlett made one last desperate attempt. She grabbed Michael's arm, her voice laced with bitterness. She's manipulating you, Michael. Don't you see? She's always been like this, making you feel guilty, playing the victim. Michael paused at the top of the stairs, turning his head slightly. I'm not being manipulated. Scarlett, he said, his voice firm, unwavering. I'm choosing between right and wrong. And you, Scarlett, are profoundly, unequivocally, wrong. Scarlett stared at his retreating back, her pleas dying on her lips. Genuine tears, born of despair, and the sudden, brutal reality of her loss, began to stream down her face. Michael saw them, but felt no pity. Some things, once broken, simply couldn't be fixed. The car ride to Michael's small apartment was silent, save for the muffled, fading sobs from Scarlett in the back seat. Eleanor sat beside Michael, her hand resting on his arm, a silent anchor in the storm. Michael drove, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. He felt a profound guilt, a heavy weight settling in his chest. I should have seen it, Mom, he murmured, his voice thick with self-reproach. There were little signs, weren't there? Little glimpses of her true character that I ignored, that I rationalized away. Eleanor simply squeezed his arm, offering silent comfort. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would face it together. Eleanor declares that her love for Michael is genuine, while Scarlett's was for the idea of him and the status it conferred. The silent drive through the city felt heavy with unspoken sorrow and simmering anger. Eleanor reached over, her hand gently resting on Michael's forearm. Michael, perhaps you're being too harsh. Maybe Scarlett just made a mistake. She was under a lot of pressure. Michael shook his head, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. No, Mom. This wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. This was deliberate. This was a choice. She chose, over 2 months, to let you suffer. She chose to lie to me. She chose to treat you like dirt. And she chose to hit you. That's not a mistake, Mom. That's cruelty. And some things, some choices, are unforgivable. His voice was firm, resolute, leaving no room for doubt. Eleanor fell silent, Michael's words echoing in her mind. She had spent a lifetime making excuses for others, always finding the good, always hoping for the best. It was hard for her to accept such malice, such deliberate harm, especially from someone she had once considered family. But Michael's clarity was undeniable. Scarlett's actions had not been out of carelessness, but out of a calculated disregard for Eleanor's well-being. Scarlett didn't understand family, Michael thought. She didn't understand loyalty, or sacrifice, or unconditional love. They soon arrived at Michael's apartment, a modest, functional space, clean and sparsely decorated. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of Celeste and Reginald's mansion, yet it felt infinitely warmer, safer. Michael led Eleanor inside, his voice softening. "Mom, you take the bedroom. I'll sleep on the couch. You need a proper bed, a proper rest," Eleanor protested weakly. "No, Michael. This is your home. I can take the couch." "Absolutely not," he insisted, a gentle but firm authority in his voice. "You've been through enough. Take the bed. Please." Eleanor, seeing the determination in his eyes, nodded. Temporarily, she conceded, a small smile touching her lips. Michael smiled back, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes, the first one she had seen since his return, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. That night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Eleanor slept soundly. No mildew, no fear, no constant humiliation, just the quiet hum of the city outside and the comforting knowledge that her son was near. She felt a fragile tendril of hope unfurl in her heart, envisioning a future beyond mere survival, a future where she could finally begin to rebuild her dignity. The next morning, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled Michael's apartment. They sat at a small kitchen table, the early morning light filtering through the blinds. Michael poured Eleanor a second cup, his gaze warm and steady. "You're not going through this alone anymore, Mom," he declared, his voice firm with renewed purpose. "Not ever again." Just as Eleanor felt a sense of peace settling over her, a sharp, insistent knock rattled the apartment door. Michael's jaw tightened. He knew who it was. He opened the door to reveal Scarlett, looking utterly disheveled. Her usually immaculate hair was a mess, her clothes rumpled, and the faint, unmistakable scent of alcohol clung to her. Her eyes were swollen and red from crying, a raw, desperate plea in their depths. "Michael," she sobbed. "Please. I need to talk to you. Both of you." Michael's face was a battleground of conflicting emotions, anger, disgust, but also a sliver of the old affection, a ghost of their shared past. He hesitated for a long moment, then stepped aside. "5 minutes," he stated, his voice flat. "That's all you get." Scarlett stumbled inside, her gaze immediately finding Eleanor. She dropped to her knees, a dramatic gesture that felt rehearsed, even through her genuine distress. "Eleanor," she wailed. "I am so sorry. I truly am. I don't know what came over me. The stress, you know. With Michael coming home, I just wanted everything to be perfect. And I got overwhelmed. It wasn't fair of me." Her apology felt hollow, thin and brittle, like old parchment. Eleanor felt no real warmth from it. The blame, though couched in tears, was still on external factors, on Michael's return, on the need for perfection, never truly on her own actions or malice. Michael, standing over Scarlett, his arms crossed, remained unmoved. "Stress?" he repeated, his voice laced with disdain. "Wanting everything to be perfect? Is that your justification for letting my mother sleep in her car, Scarlett? Is that why you slapped her? Is that why you called her domestic help and a burden?" He stared down at her, his voice hardening. "You still don't understand, do you? You still can't grasp the concept of abuse. Calling her a useful burden isn't some harmless slip. It was a deliberate choice to devalue her." It was then that Eleanor finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm, carrying a newfound strength. She stood tall, meeting Scarlett's tearful gaze directly. "Scarlett," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "you said I made poor choices. You said I was not naturally inclined to the finer points of domestic management. You implied my financial situation was my own fault." Eleanor paused, letting her words sink in. "The truth is, Scarlett, you believed I was a failure. You believed my problems were self-inflicted. And that made it easy for you to justify treating me as you did. You didn't see me as a person, but as a project, a burden, or simply a means to prove your superiority." Eleanor took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "My love for Michael is genuine, Scarlett. It's built on sacrifice, on years of shared struggle and unconditional support. It's for the man he is, not what he can provide. But your love for him, she concluded, her voice tinged with sadness, was for the idea of Michael. For the status he conferred. For the stability he represented. You loved the idea of his success, not the heart of the man. And you certainly never truly cared for the people who made him who he is. 6 months later, Eleanor and Arthur marry in their backyard, a celebration of chosen family, love, and partnership. Eleanor stood, a newfound strength radiating from her as she delivered her final, poignant words to Scarlett. If you truly loved Michael, Scarlett, she concluded, her voice soft but unwavering, you wouldn't have caused him such pain, not just now, but by hurting me, by denying him the truth. Love doesn't seek to diminish or exploit. It cherishes and protects. Michael watched Scarlett, and in his eyes, Eleanor saw the last flickering ember of his love for his wife die. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Scarlett, he said quietly, his voice devoid of any warmth. It's time for you to leave, and don't come back. Scarlett stared at him, her tear-streaked face a picture of utter despair. She searched their faces for any crack in their united front, any sign of wavering, but found none. Michael's decision was absolute, Eleanor's condemnation final. With a strangled sob, she turned and stumbled out of the apartment, the door closing softly behind her, sealing her out of their lives forever. A heavy silence descended upon the small apartment. Michael and Eleanor sat together, the space filled with the unspoken weight of the marriage that had just ended, the betrayal that had surfaced, and the uncertain future stretching before them. It was a silence of processing, of healing, of beginning anew. After a long while, Michael stirred. He pulled out his phone, his movements deliberate. First call, he announced, his voice firm, is to a divorce lawyer. Then, my commanding officer. I need to sort out my leave and potential transfer. And then, he looked at Eleanor, a gentle resolve in his eyes. A realtor. For a bigger place. A 2-bedroom apartment, at least. Eleanor's old instincts flared. Michael, no, you don't need to do that. I'm not a burden. I can find my own place. He cut her off, his voice firm but tender. Mom, you are not, and have never been, a burden. It's my turn to care for you. You spent your entire life caring for me, sacrificing everything. Now, it's my turn. We're a team, remember? And teams stick together. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest, a profound sense of hope and pride swelling within her. She was no longer alone. 3 weeks later, through Michael's extensive network of contacts, Eleanor found a part-time job at the Riverside Community Library. It was a perfect fit, allowing her to be surrounded by books and people. A gentle re-entry into the world. It offered not just income, but purpose. To their surprise, Scarlett returned a few days after Eleanor started her new job. She was no longer disheveled or tearful, but composed, if still fragile. She admitted she had been to therapy. Her apology this time felt more sincere, stripped of the blame and self-pity. Eleanor, she said, her voice quiet, I'm so sorry. Truly. I realize now. I loved the idea of Michael, the idea of the military wife life, the stability, the status. Not the reality. And I didn't see you, Eleanor. I just saw an obstacle, a drain. I understand now what I did. Eleanor listened, her heart softening slightly. Thank you for saying that. Scarlett, she replied, her voice gentle. It takes a lot to admit such things. I acknowledge your understanding, and I hope you find your path. But some damage, once done, cannot be undone. Scarlett nodded, a single tear tracking down her cheek, and left, this time for good. Eleanor thrived at the library. She rediscovered a sense of purpose, her confidence slowly blooming. She made new friends, sharing stories and laughter. It was there, among the quiet hum of turning pages and hushed conversations, that she met Arthur, a retired English teacher, with kind eyes and a gentle humor. Their shared love for literature quickly blossomed into daily coffee dates, then long walks, and soon, a deep, unexpected friendship. A new chapter had truly begun. 6 months later, Eleanor had saved enough from her part-time work to secure her own small, cozy apartment. It wasn't grand, but it was hers, a testament to her renewed independence. Michael visited often, and during one of their visits, he made a surprising announcement. "Mom," he began, his eyes serious, "I want to buy a house, not just for me, but for us. A place where we can both live, truly live. Not out of need this time, but out of companionship. I missed you too much, Mom." Eleanor's heart swelled. They found a modest, 3-bedroom house on a quiet, tree-lined street. It had a small garden, perfect for Eleanor's green thumb. Arthur, with his characteristic gentle enthusiasm, welcomed the change, often coming over to help paint or plant flowers. 3 months after finding the house, Eleanor and Michael officially moved into their new home. A small housewarming party was held, attended by Michael's military friends, Eleanor's new colleagues from the library, and, of course, Arthur. It was a celebration not just of a new house, but of a new, authentic life, built on honesty, respect, and unconditional love. Eleanor stood in her beautiful new living room, filled with laughter and warmth, reflecting on her journey. She had lost so much, endured so much pain, but she had gained infinitely more. She realized that true happiness lay not in grand houses or societal status, but in authentic relationships, in self-worth, and in the unwavering love of family. Michael, seeing her contemplative gaze, wrapped an arm around her. "No regrets, Mom," he said, reading her thoughts. "Leaving Scarlett was the best decision I ever made. You found your strength, and I found my way back to what truly matters." 6 months later, in the sun-drenched backyard of their new home, Eleanor and Arthur exchanged vows. It was a small, intimate ceremony, a celebration of chosen family, enduring love, and the beautiful, unexpected partnership that life had brought her. Eleanor, standing beside Arthur, holding Michael's hand, finally felt truly, completely home.